Hey there, guys. Thanks for joining me and welcome to another Holy Shed. Hope you've had a fab time over Easter. Uh, it's been amazing, hasn't it? Great weather. It's gone off a little bit now, but it's still only early May. We enjoyed a very welcome break and a gorgeous time in Somerset with our daughter Lizzie and her wife Andre celebrating Lizzie's birthday. But it's great to be back here with you again today, here in the shed. A couple of weeks ago, I invited you to suggest things that you would like me to discuss. And do keep them coming, by the way. But Rosie, she took me up on it straight away and asked if I, by any chance, had a different take on that text where Jesus says, "You must deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me." She says it scared her as a child and made life sound so awful. Are there any other biblical interpretations of this verse that are less bleak than the literal one? She asked. Well, that's a great question. So I'm going to strike while the iron's hot and make this question our theme for today. And well, Rosie, yeah, I think there are numerous ways of reading that text, like any other, But it's interesting that this particular one appears in one form or another in all three of the synoptic gospels, which I always take as a bit of a signal that it was pretty important to the early churches. Although, like you, Rosie, it never figured as one of my personal favourites growing up. But just before we dive into that, by way of introduction, I'd like to pinpoint what I consider to be the central and underlying truth of the entire Christian faith. It concerns, of course, the character of God. As I often say, theology literally means Godology, right? Theo, God. Godology. And that's what it is in its purest sense, the study and consideration of who or what God is or what God is like. And nothing could be more important. Everything else flows from that. Indeed, I reckon that if I can understand or glimpse the kind of God a person envisages, then I can pretty much describe the kind of Christianity and theology that they will believe in. The God issue is the determining factor of everything else. So when I see Christians behaving certain ways, um, my immediate question is, what sort of God do you believe in? Because I think sometimes people behave in ways and spout out ideas, beliefs, and theologies which are so distant from any sort of God that I can believe in that I think really it's like another religion. And I think sometimes, listening to and watching certain religious expressions, that's all I can conclude. This is a different religion. It's a different faith altogether. So what is it then that I see as this central and unifying or underlying truth of the Christian faith? Well, it's this: God is love. Simple as that. John records it in 1 John 4:16. He says, God is love, and those who live in love live in God, and God lives in them, which I always say is probably the most inclusive statement in the Bible. Those who live in love live in God, and God loves in them. But it's built on this one little statement: God is love. Three little words, and a statement as concise as it is direct and definitive. And by comparison with that, all the rest is basically window dressing. Important, but absolutely secondary. If there's just one thing that we need to know about God, it is this: that God is love. When I talked to a congregation of mourners on Friday, when I took the funeral of a woman called Doreen, and the congregation clearly were not religious, and they made that clear. They said they wanted something that wasn't too religious. Funeral director always thinks of me when they say that. And I told them in the service that God is love is my essential creed. No more, no less. I said, in one way, you could sort of put the rest over there, and this would say it all. Well, there was a room full of smiling faces. They got it. And I think most people do. It's the North Star of my faith, the guiding light, and yes, my essential creed, but also the hermeneutical lens through which I view everything else. It's my instinctive question, the rule by which I measure all things religious and theologically. It's this: how does this substantiate or undermine the reality of the affirmation, God is love? Because that to me is, the measuring line for everything. How much does this, which I'm seeing or hearing, substantiate or undermine the reality that God is love? If there are things in the world that make God sad or disappointed or even angry, it won't be the breaking of ethical or religious rules. It'll be the absence of love. That's what makes God sad or disappointed or angry, I believe. Injustice, violence, prejudice, abuse, exploitation, hatred, corruption, all these kinds of things. They're just examples of the absence of love. That's what they are. Love, Paul says, is the fulfillment of the law. If there's love, then commandments and rules are not necessary, right? You don't need them, because all that they're doing, quite simply, is trying very imperfectly to mimic or describe what love should look like in practice. That's what it's all about. So, if we have love and if we lived perfectly in love, then rules and commandments and all that kind of stuff would be utterly unnecessary, because all they're doing is substituting for and trying to point towards what a loving life or response would be. And here's the thing: love always strives to nurture life in its fullest and truest sense. That love brings things to life, brings people to life, just as the sun creates and sustains life on earth. Love, well, it resurrects life in some shape or form. Yes, of course, there is such a thing as death, but love is in constant conflict with death, works against death, and ultimately, I believe, overcomes death. So yes, in the end, love wins. That's another pretty good creedal statement, isn't it? God is love, and love wins. Faith, hope, and love endure, Paul says, but the greatest of these is love, because he says love never fails, love never ends. What this means in terms of life beyond physical death, well, frankly, is above my pay grade. I haven't died yet, so I can't say. But what I know about is this life, in which love always moves toward enhancing life. That's the movement of love. It enhances life, causes life to flourish in any and every way possible in a given situation. God is love. Love creates life. So whether we're discussing religion or politics or culture or interpersonal relationships, the question that matters is this: does this relationship, does this political policy or regime, does this cultural expression, this religious practice or belief cause life to flourish or to wither? Does it spread love or create animosity, conflict, hatred, death, and all those other things? It really is as simple as that, I think. I think the same criteria should be applied to the way that we read and interpret sacred text like the Bible. In what is this belief or text, in what way, rather, is this belief or text expressive of love? That's the question. In what way does it enhance life? And we can apply this to the text itself, or indeed to the way in which it's taught or preached. I have seen people, I'm sure you have too, I have seen people clobbered with the Bible, clobbered by the way that it's preached. I've seen people ground down, repressed, oppressed. I've also seen people liberated, healed, and affirmed, and lifted up with the way the Bible is believed and taught. So here's the basis for my own approach to the meaning of everything, okay? The meaning of my faith, my approach to biblical hermeneutics, my outlook on life in general. The whole thing is summarized in this. Is this love? Does it enhance life and cause people to flourish, or doesn't it? That is the question that I find gives expression to my understanding of meaning in life. And so let's come to the text that we're talking about. You must deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. Is this a life-enhancing statement, or is it life-diminishing? Bleak. Is it bleak, as Rosie said? Well, it all depends on how it's understood, how it's interpreted, how it's applied. I mean, I think there's an historical, factual way of looking at it, which I'll get to briefly in a moment. But in popular preaching and teaching, this passage is often conveyed in the way that Rosie says. It's used to say something like, if life is hard or crap, it's your cross. Bear it. So the upshot seems to be, just accept suffering. Live with it. Remain patient and faithful and all the rest of it, Excellent, eh? Honestly, I have counselled women over the years who have been told in their churches that living faithfully and patiently in abusive or even violent marriages is their cross to bear. Well, bollocks is what I've told them. That is bollocks. And I have, basically said, look, you need to get out of that relationship. Love and respect yourself enough to step out of it and move on. And, all the rest about sort of, being a good Christian wife and all the rest of it is basically bollocks. Or the text might alternatively be taken as saying that being a Christian is all about self-denial, right? And that's how lots of people understand the Christian life. It's about self-denial. It's about denying yourself worldly pleasures or your preferences in life. Definitely denying yourself physical pleasures as much as possible. Carry the cross of self-denial. Basically beware of pleasure apart from good, wholesome Christian pleasure, like singing choruses and going to church and all those other heavenly activities. The bottom line is, none of what I've just described is life-enhancing, right? Indeed, it denies the humanity given to us by a loving, life-giving God. And that sort of instinctive question that I think I certainly was familiar with in my younger Christian life, that somehow if I wanted it, and certainly if I wanted it a lot, if I longed for something, then probably it was wrong, And if there was something that I didn't fancy and I didn't like, then probably that was the will of God. That's another way in which that text, I think, has been understood and interpreted. And I mean, I'm sorry I'm saying this a few times tonight, but basically bollocks. Now, of course, none of this is to suggest that life is supposed to be or even can be one long, pleasurable fairground ride. Of course not. Following Jesus, just living a decent life, will inevitably involve a price. There's a price to be paid for something that's good. It will require us denying ourselves pleasurable things at sometimes, not because they're bad in themselves, not because pain or suffering is virtuous, because it isn't, not because it's character building, which is another bit of bollocks, but rather we do these things sometimes out of love. The first thing that my lovely Pat did in our relationship, we hadn't been together very long, she was at college, and the first thing that she did that I can remember in our relationship, apart from the snog we had, in the garage that was closed. Anyway, forget that. The first thing she did was to use some of her college grant money. Oh yeah, that was a thing back then. She used some of her grant money to buy me a suit for a wedding that we were going to go to. It was a sacrifice, you know. But since then, for 50 something years, she has sacrificed far more for me, denied herself in order for me to flourish in all kinds of ways. None of this was out of duty, much less out of guilt, but out of love. Our marriage, like any good relationship, has flourished through sacrifice, suffering, and denial. But it has flourished. You know, it's been a joy, it's been fun, it's been endless love. And anyone who is in that kind of relationship, has been in it for any amount of time, knows that in order for relationships to flourish, there has to be some self-denial, there has to be some sacrifice. But as I say, it's not coming from some pressure, from some sense of duty or guilt, but because you love the other person, you know. All kinds of people have shown the same level of dedication and much more on a wider scale out of love. You know, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Dorothy Day, Nelson Mandela, thousands of others, some famous and some never heard of, have had an impact upon the world, sometimes mightily so, because of things that they believed enough, or because they had enough love, that the price was worth paying. Yeah? I mean, love gets an athlete out of bed at 4 o'clock to train. Not me, but it does. Love inspires people in the NHS to work crazy hours for minimal wages. You know, we could go on giving lots and lots of examples of this. People deny themselves in all kinds of ways, make sacrifices, you know, carry their cross if you like. But they do it out of love and out of a commitment to something more important in their lives, not as a religious guilt response to some text in the Bible. I take the idea of denying oneself and bearing one's cross as symbolic of the fact that anything worthwhile in life requires sacrifice, requires effort. But often, for those involved, sacrifice and effort and self-denial isn't any kind of, it doesn't come onto their landscape. This is not what they're thinking about. That's not the focus of their attention. What's the focus of their attention is the object of their love, you know, the goals that they wish to score, the people that they wish to care for, the achievement that they wish to feel in doing something that they really want to do. The Christian churches to whom the Gospels were originally addressed lived in a state of persecution, right? From both the Jewish community and also from the Romans. So to be a Christian in those early sort of decades, certainly of the church's life, there was a price involved in following Jesus, which threw up a decision, you know, whether to take up that particular cross and keep following him because this is what you loved and what you were committed to, or abandoning the whole thing along the way. Just as an athlete might say, I've had enough of this, stuff this for a game of soldiers, you know, I'm going to stay in bed today. You know, it's the same thing. But for those early disciples to whom the Gospels were addressed, it wasn't a choice based on guilt or duty, it was on love, just as friends and partners and colleagues often have to make hard choices for those that they love and care about. But sadly, over the centuries, the church has often made a virtue out of suffering. I hate that, don't you? They make a virtue out of suffering, sustained by often a culture of guilt and shame. And frankly, as I say, I hate it. I hate it when a community originally based on and born out of grace and love and the eradication of shame and guilt perpetuates a culture of guilt in the name of God, the God who is love and grace. And it just seems strange to me that the people sometimes who most vehemently affirm that Jesus took all our guilt on the cross, it seemed that once we've accepted that, to immediately put another load of guilt upon us, all the rules and things that we're supposed to conform to. This is not what that verse is about. It's not what Jesus was about at all. One of my favourite quotes of Jesus is in John chapter 10, where he says, "I am come that you may have life and have it more abundantly." He didn't say, "I've come that you may have guilt," or "I've come to stop you having pleasure," or to repress your humanity, but that you may have life in all its fullness, in all its glory. So, dear friends, when life brings hardship or suffering to you, I pray that it will never diminish your sense of self-worth, that you'll never feel obliged to make a virtue out of suffering. Suffering something that we fight against, that we resist. But when it comes, I pray that it will never diminish your sense of self-worth. When sacrifice and strenuous dedication is the way for you to achieve your goals or express the love that you feel deeply for another, I pray that you will not flinch, but embrace the discomfort as a pathway to life. But remember, faith's not about guilt. It's about love. It's about life in all its glory. And any expression of religion that says something different is completely wrong, I think that faith is supposed to bring a shout of joy out of the depths of our hearts. So let's finish with a toast to life in all its fullness. That's all we need to say about it. If you've got a drink, join me. Because, this is what it's about, to life in all its fullness. L'chaim. So there we are. Do please let me know if there are questions that you have or issues that you'd like us to explore. I mean, it's why I'm here. I don't want to just spout off my things. I'm very happy to respond to things that you are concerned about or questioning or whatever. So do let me know if that's something that's going on with you. And if you like all of this, if you like what I'm doing in the Holy Shed, you can support us. You can buy us a coffee by just following the link on the screen here. Go to my coffee site. And thank you so much to all those of you who do this faithfully and who encourage us in lots of the ways too. It's much appreciated. Just one thing to mention is, well, two things actually. One is that tomorrow morning I am doing my last in a series of 4 Pause for Thoughts that I've been doing, and that's on Radio 2 around about 7:20 on the breakfast show, and it's available very soon after on BBC Sounds. And I'm talking tomorrow about Doreen, whose funeral I mentioned earlier on. A remarkable woman. I'll just give you one hint that when I was trying to find out who she was and what she was about, because I'd never met her, her son said to me, "Do you know Catherine Tate's character, Nan?" So I said, "Yeah." He said, "That was my mum." So if you want to hear a bit more, you can listen in the Pause for Thought. And the other thing I just want to mention is that last week I did a sermon at St. Leonard's in Streatham about Thomas, the patron saint of doubt. And if you want to hear that, I've posted the link up on my Facebook page. Fantastic. So there it is, basically, for today. And I look forward to seeing you again very soon. Have a great week. Be kind to yourselves. That's not the way that passages we've been thinking about is often interpreted, but I do believe it's important to be kind to yourself, be kind to people around you. Stay human, because that's who God's made us. And I look forward to seeing you again very soon. Bye.